For this last session, we're honored to have, as was mentioned before, of course, Chairman Armstrong and Commissioner Landis, representing Indiana and Kentucky. We're going to start off and ask some questions and let them, share their wisdom with us of many years of being in different capacities in their careers. The chairman starting out in legal politics as a mayor of a major U.S. city, attorney general, and now serving, what is it, a second or third term? Second term in the PSC. Commissioner Landis coming more from the business background, but now having many years of experience at the commission, and I guess just a few weeks ago announced retirement. And he said he's still valuable enough that people are asking for favors, so it hasn't gotten close enough to his retirement that they've written him off completely. And so we were one of those people through our colleagues at Ball State that asked for a favor, and that is for him to come down, and he's going to have a long night getting back. But just remember, you're going to be riding back with the grad students. They'll keep you young, and they'll probably teach you what a hashtag is and a couple of other things before you do get back there. So we will have time for questions and all from the audience, so please be thinking about things that you might like to ask either or both of our presenters here today. But I want to start off by giving each of them a chance to sort of talk about how their organization is structured and how, based upon not only their state level but their national level involvement, of how they see things as different with other states. Chairman, would you?
I guess the best way to describe it, we structure our commission by function, and beginning with the filings section all the way through all the other things that we do to address orders as the final stage. And I've been in a lot of different organizations. This seems to form and model, seems to fit us best. And the attorneys and utilities that come before us understand how it works and who's in those respective areas. And so, by and large, I think our structure fits us best.
Okay. Commissioner Lance?
Yeah, I think most commissions at the very basic level are organized much the same. You may have 3 commissioners, you may have 5. A few commissions have 7 members, and obviously a technical staff. I think as we've seen the evolution in particular of telecom over the course of the last decade, one of the things that we've seen is a reduction in the number of proceedings in the telecom area. Not to say that those that exist are unimportant in any sense, but one of the ways in which that has changed has been in terms of we're not doing many of the things that a decade ago we would have been done or would have occurred in many commissions. We're no longer setting rates. I think that's probably the case in the majority of the states. Perhaps as many as 35 or 40 have deregulated the industry economically. In Indiana, we have a light regulatory touch in terms of telecom, which goes back to House Enrolled Act 1279 that was passed in 2006, that among other things lightens the regulatory touch. We got rid of about 80% of the legacy regulations that were on the books in the process of doing that in a very large proceeding after the law was passed, which goes to show that no matter what you are in terms of the way in which your organization is structured, it might be a good idea to look from time to time at how you've done it and whether what you've done is useful on a going forward basis. So probably the majority of commissions across the nation at this point have adopted one form or another of a light regulatory touch. There are other commissions that are kind of in transition between the two, and then there are some that are more closely adhering to the sort of traditional model, including some that still do rate cases, but in Indiana we're not in that realm. So,
Somewhat as a follow-up on that, what has been your feeling of the change and the effect of the change to light regulation? Has that been successful? Are there things that are still in progress? What's your assessment?
well, I think, if you look at one of the major measures is broadband, that made a major change in terms of the climate in Indiana. By virtue of passing 1279, that opened up video franchising for telecom, also kind of put the two major sectors on more of an even, the two major terrestrial sectors at least, on more of an even keel. That unleashed an explosion of investment. AT&T alone in the last decade in Indianapolis, or in Indiana, has invested about $1.5 billion in the network, and a significant chunk of that in wireless. Would that amount have been invested with a more restrictive environment? Probably not. Comcast has invested approximately $500 to $600 million in Indiana. And so what we've seen is a real example of what's sometimes pointed to, I think, rhetorically as the virtuous cycle. Two competitors being aggressive. At the same time, we've seen significant build out in broadband in the rural areas, although if we may get to that issue, that's a major unresolved issue. So I think overall it's been very beneficial. And the wheels have not come off since we're not setting rates anymore.
Right. In the introduction, I mentioned the different backgrounds that you sort of each come from. If you wouldn't mind sort of sharing a little bit about your background and how that plays into your current position, either your thinking or your style of dealing with things, Chairman Armstrong.
Well, I started out as a trial lawyer, and the prosecuting attorney in Louisville forgot to give me evidence which would have helped my client. And so I decided to run against him. I didn't grow up in Louisville, and I was born in Hope, Arkansas, and I grew up in Madison, Indiana, and so I ran against the fellow. He'd been there for 12 years. He was the Commonwealth Attorney for life, and but we were successful in defeating him 60-40, and I held that position as the youngest district attorney the city had, and held it for 9 years. I became president of the National DA's organization, and I was on Carter's group that investigated human rights in the Soviet Union. I was in Reagan's task force on violent crime, and had a lot of great opportunities that came my way by virtue of my holding the position. I later became Attorney General, and at that time only had one term in Kentucky, and so all the constitutional offices had but one term. So I enjoyed that. I would have liked to have stayed in that longer, but I did my one term and returned to Louisville and practiced law, and then was asked to run for county judge executive. And that's for you folks who are not from Kentucky, that's one of the more powerful jobs at one time. When I took office, my county police department could arrest someone, and my county attorney, which is under my jurisdiction as well, could prosecute him. Then I appointed the county district court judges, and the New York Times wrote, "This is the most powerful position in government anywhere in America, and we should do away with it." So the next year they did with a judicial article, and I remained there for 9 years. I succeeded Mitch McConnell, who everybody's aware of, and I had a little different approach on it and specialized in more economic development issues. I brought Toyota along with Governor Collins to Kentucky, and I enjoyed that prospect. I also merged the city and county governments, and that's a very difficult task. And the city people thought I was too county, and when I ran for county judge, they thought I was too city. So by virtue of swearing that I wouldn't run but one time, to make it happen, I was able to bring it together. And now we're a metropolitan government with more revenue than ever, and more services and better services, so it's a good thing. And that was the last office I held, and I had 38 years of elected politics, and I was ensconced in a very nice law firm, and the governor tapped on my shoulder and he said, "You owe me," and I really did owe him, so I took this for one term, and then I was ready to go, and I liked the job so much I stayed for a second term. So that's what has brought me together. I think the experience of dealing with tough situations and a lot of pressurized decisions I had to make served me well. This past year has been very pressurized. We've had the Kentucky Power case, which has been on the New York Times front page several times, and the decision went that we allowed, it was issued yesterday, the Kentucky Power and the Big Sandy generating plant is now allowed to buy energy on the grid from a sister generation company in Ohio, the first time ever. So we made a lot of inroads with a good commission. I have two colleagues, Linda Breathitt, who comes from Western Kentucky, and Jim Gardner from Lexington. We have taken on this year more cases than some commissions in Kentucky would take on in almost a year's time, but just this summer. So it's been an experience for all of us. We've learned a lot. We deal in a world of reality. We know that coal has been a principal resource for all generation in Kentucky. We currently have the Big Rivers case pending, and we're close to rendering that decision. But we've been able to talk some of the electric utilities to consider blending gas, natural gas, and scrub coal. That has seemed to work with LG&E, and they have 2 plants under that arrangement. In addition, we're looking at the big pipeline, liquefied natural gas coming through from Pennsylvania through, I think, Ohio and Kentucky, and then to Tennessee. That will bring some controversy, and the legislature has already received some preliminary bills to either direct us in whether we should assume jurisdiction over that big pipeline or not. So we'll wait for the legislature to act this next year. But all in all, I think most people don't realize that we really care about our decisions. We do handle rates, and we do handle a number of tough situations, and I can compare them to major trials. And it's we have 2 lawyers and a former FERC member on our commission. It's a good mix, and it's one that we, even though we argue vigorously on our decisions, we come away still respecting each other and making sure that the order that we render is what the governor would be pleased with, the legislature would be pleased with, and our citizens would be pleased with. So that's our goal, and that's what we shoot for, and I think it's been successful. But I welcome any criticism.
All right. I was afraid there for a moment you were going to say that your trial experience fit you in with all the criminals in the
Yes.
telecom business, but and so forth. The other point there was he mentioned Hope, Arkansas, and last night we brought in one of his kindergarten classmates, and I was hoping that she was going to be able to share some information with us that might make some of your rate cases and some of your appeals easier, but she was very tight-lipped. I don't know if there was any witness tampering or anything like that was occurring.
It's a bond we have.
Anyway, Commissioner Landis.
Criminals in the telecom area, that's reminiscent of the story they used to tell about Tip O'Neill, who supposedly was awakened by his wife in the middle of the night one night. Tip, wake up. What? Tip, I think there's a thief in the house. No, dear, maybe in the Senate, but never in the House.
That's right.
I think one of the things that Chairman Armstrong touched on very fleetingly that I think is worth underscoring in terms of both of our backgrounds and kind of where we come to later on in our careers is the notion of the spirit of bipartisanship. He mentioned, for example, that he had served in roles in both the Carter and the Reagan administrations. I started out very early outside the private sector. My first real big job was as gopher for Dick Lugar, who was running for mayor of the city of Indianapolis. And I was actually Dick Lugar's first staffer. Later worked for him in the mayor's office for about 3 years. In between, worked on a political campaign for Bill Ruckelhaus, who ran for the United States Senate in Indiana against Birch Bayh, who was the father of Evan Bayh, later governor. But out of that went into the private sector, working for a number of different number of different marketing roles, including 11 years with a solo consulting practice on alternate days, the smartest and the dumbest thing I ever did in my life. I think anybody who's ever gone through that experience will know what I mean. The bulk of my experience is in marketing and marketing-related analysis, and I find it interesting because there are really only 2 individuals out of 230 commissioners that have a background of any nature close to that. And yet you think about it, one of the 5 sectors that we all traditionally deal with, telecom, is largely market-driven at this point. And yet there are relatively few individuals with a background and an understanding of marketing and how to operate in a market-driven environment or a largely market-driven environment. I think that also helps you in terms of separating the wheat from the chaff when you get reams and reams of data. Because like several other areas, marketing is very much data-driven and increasingly model-driven. And so that experience, I think, has been beneficial to me in terms of my service on the Commission in that regard as well.
Chairman Armstrong, with your heavy involvement with NARUC, and looking at issues that are being addressed at the national level and discussed there, what should we be considering today, and what are the things that we haven't maybe discussed? Are there any things that, other issues that you're seeing brought out that are either on the horizon or that are percolating at that level that are of concern?
It's not a new issue, it's an old issue. It's states' rights. It's about, for me, when you see Order 1000 coming down from FERC, that we have regional planning without any definition, and it turns out that we are going to be, the planning is going to take place for us in Kentucky by the large Alabama co-op, the can't grasp the name of it right now, the Southern Company, and they're going to be working on the planning for most of the utilities in Kentucky per a FERC order. It wasn't decided by the legislature, it wasn't decided by the governor. This is what FERC ordered. Now, we have responded to that. I wrote a letter the moment I got a copy of it, saying that what they've ordered is something that is not constitutional, I believe. And but they blink and go ahead. So that fight's not over with. But in the coming year, I think you're going to see more and hear more about it from perhaps legislatures or perhaps others in being affected by this. The Southern people are quality people, they're good people, they have good representation in Congress, but it's something that is not quite settled with us as well. And I think you see a lot of the FCC decisions coming down that usurp the state as well. And I think, you know, it's going to happen that way. I think there's an agenda that's coming out of Washington that's pretty, they ignore what the states want. There's been no attempt to talk about setting carbon standards. The industry itself began talking about a 10 to 20% tax on carbon. That's what the industry was looking at. Now it's all about if the footprint is significantly carbonized, you're going to have to not use coal at all. There is no give and take. It's an edict. So that's the confrontation, I think, that I feel uncomfortable with. And I think we need to, NABURC has been opposing a lot of these directives coming out of FERC, and they're on the record of opposing Rule 1000. They are also frequently opposing the FCC rulings, even though we have a former officer from South Carolina who was a local commissioner, now on the commission. So I think this coming year is going to be a tough year for states like coast states like West Virginia and Tennessee and Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois. I mean, the heartland of America. And the reason we were able to industrialize the heartland was because of coal. And now it's a resource that we're slowly being banned from using. So without any discussion at all, where else would that happen? It wouldn't happen anywhere else. It's happened here. No discussion. So that's a challenge for NABURC, and it's a challenge for all local state commissions. And it's one that I take very seriously, and I think there ought to be voices raised about how we've been co-opted, so to speak. It's a challenge for us ahead.
Commissioner Landis, you're involved with the Federal-State Joint Board, and if you wouldn't mind sort of sharing something about your role there and what do you see the future of that group and where things are going?
That depends to a significant extent on who is chairman at the FCC. I mean, Jim made reference to the co-option of state authority with regard to FERC. I would just add, while generally echoing his sentiments, that the one person who has stood up against that, is a former commissioner from North Dakota, Tony Clark, who's on the FERC. And, so I think what we're trying to do, among other things, is to support those individuals, who are saying, wait a minute, we really need to operate according to the law. I mean, that's what it's all about at the FCC. And that's a good deal of what I have seen during my involvement in the Joint Board on Universal Service. In particular, over the course of the last 4 years under Chairman Janikowski, and particularly with regard to the transformation order, I would contend that the actions that were taken by the FCC are flat out illegal. They preempted not only the states in a number of areas, simply usurping what is by statute reserved to the states, but they preempted Congress. I mean, Congress set out very clearly what the roles of the states and the federal government are to be, and that all relates to the concept of federalism. Where it's been convenient, the FCC has largely scrapped those. Now, I say FCC, and that's painting it with a very broad brush, but at the top, at least under former Chairman Janikowski, it was. I find it difficult even to struggle to find the words to characterize it without going over the brain. But what I will say is that it appears that the FCC has finally realized, or at least some of the newer members of the FCC have finally realized just how dysfunctional the transformation order is. I mean, here is an order, the central focus of which is a mathematical model which involves 16 variables, 14 of which are flawed in one of 6 or 7 different measures, on top of which they're using a statistical model to infer things that you simply cannot infer. What do I mean by that? Essentially, let's take the example of what causes large fires. Well, now, we know that when there are large fires, there are not large numbers of firemen around those large fires. So if you use the logic of the FCC, firemen, particularly large quantities of firemen, are responsible for causing big fires. I mean, there has been no attempt whatsoever to use the basics of causal inference, which is a basic statistical tool that's been around for 50 years. So we're seeing that dysfunctionality manifest. The FCC has, in the last 18 months, revisited that order 6 times. And I think a hopeful sign is that in the last 2, Commissioner Rosenworcel in the 5th order on reconsideration and Commissioner Pai in the 6th order basically pointed out these fundamental flaws in the order that the FCC has passed. Reference was made earlier to the appeal that's been made to that case, and that'll be moving in about a month out in Denver. And I would be very surprised if the court didn't at least partially overturn the FCC's actions. So that's what's going on in that regard. And
well, since we have you on a roll, and this wasn't something we had discussed and all, and if you decide you don't want to answer it, but since you said you see the sunset and all, what is your prediction on the changes of the FCC? I mean, is it too early to tell yet, or do you feel that it's moving in a positive or a different direction?
Well, I think Chairman Janikowski had support, unfortunately, from Commissioner McDowell on the transformation order. Commissioner McDowell did not see or chose not to see, one or the other, some of the serious flaws in that order, and enabled Janikowski to claim that this was a bipartisan situation. If you look at the two newest members of the FCC, Commissioner Rosenworcel and Commissioner Pai, those two are one Democrat, one Republican, by the way. Those two are very gifted individuals. In my involvement with the Joint Board, it's been my privilege to know Commissioner Rosenworcel for several years during her involvement with the Senate, with Senator Rockefeller. She gets it. She's very bright. She understands the issues. She understands, among other things, rural America. I think Commissioner Pai is equally gifted. Likewise, he comes from a rural background. He comes from Kansas. So I'm very encouraged by both of them. I think we may see something of a restoration of balance in terms of the FCC just following procedural law and administrative law. In the transformation order, the FCC literally dumped thousands of pages of testimony into the record 2 days before the FCC went into sunshine, which is the cutoff of comments before the commission issues its order. I mean, that's illegal. But as for the new chairman, I think first of all, having worked with both the cable industry and the wireless industry, I think he will take a broader view. I think he will take a multi-segment view, or perhaps more appropriately characterized, a neutral view with regard to various segments of the industry, which is very highly desirable in my estimation. He has clearly built his career. Now he has a chance to build his legacy. And I think that may be what we see from him. And I think maybe I'll reserve comment on the other appointee.
Okay. Chairman, would you care to add anything? If not, that's fine.
No, I agree with him, and it's pretty clear that those who are engaged at the levels that both of us have been engaged in NARIC, we see different faces in different directions coming, and it's not getting any better. We thought, because messages were sent to the Obama administration that there needed to be some state commissioners there. Now, Tony Clark has been appointed to the FERC, and I can't think of her name right now, from South...
Commissioner Clyburn.
And but she's voting along with the others. I mean, it's there's not a real sense of taking a look at from where we come from once they get to Washington.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll open it up for your questions, and then if you don't have any, we might come back up here with some additional ones. Our opening session this morning was on cybersecurity. And while obviously the public service commissions don't control cybersecurity, we are all impacted by it, as was discussed. You might remember back to August of 2003, when there was the massive electric grid outage in the Northeast in Canada. And while it was from a natural cause of a tree limb causing a cascading effect, former Secretary of Homeland Security Napolitano warned as she left office that, we should expect something to happen. And besides the telecom industry itself, all the other industries that you regulate, whether it's electrical, water, those infrastructures, are all controlled or impacted by telecom. And so cybersecurity is obviously a concern. And while there might not be a direct role, as there has been in the past, like the no-call list and some things like that. Is there anything about cybersecurity that keeps you awake at night in terms of as a regulator?
Sure, a lot. I have a chairman's lecture, and we have an expert to come in once a month, and it's open to everyone, and invites you, if you can be in Frankfurt, to come by. We're having the FBI agent who appeared before the NARUC to speak this coming month. He actually was the #1 cybersecurity officer for the FBI. He's now retired. But he would, his talk to us in Washington was hair-raising. And even for those of us that don't have much hair, truly hair-raising. And so I think you would get a sense of the people who are the guardians for us when they're scared to death with the amount of hacking that takes place on a daily basis. And so I invite you to come to that. Phil Jones, our past president, soon to be past president of NARUC, made cybersecurity his #1 goal this year. And because of that, we've had a number of training programs, and I've sent people from our commission here in Kentucky to attend most of those. And I would also say that Jones has testified before Congress on the same issue. I think it's the #1 concern for America and those of us in this industry. But I also know it's not just security, but it's planning more toward critical infrastructure that we need to have around our water reservoirs and our electric power plants and other plants. And the plant, most plants are beginning to retool, and I think you'll see a reflection in the need for more critical infrastructure to ensure that hacking doesn't penetrate our critical plants. So there is a very strong concern by everyone in NARUC and everyone in this commission to make sure that we leave a legacy, those of us who will be rotating off in a couple of years, that begins to ask utilities to start preparing for better infrastructure to ward off these consistent hackings that we have in this state.
Mr. Landis?
Yeah, I could not agree more. And Commissioner Caroline Mays from the Indiana Commission was just recently named chair of the NARUC Cybersecurity Committee and has been very active at the national level. In Indiana, what we have begun the process of doing, and we've been working through the various industries, is sitting down with each of the sectors in turn and going over what they are doing in camera. I mean, so this is not a public hearing, but reviewing what their plans are, what their activities are. And there are two lessons, I think, that grow out of that. One is that in general, again, the 5 sectors that we work with need to talk with each other more. The interdependencies, that exist not only in terms of, for example, communications vis-a-vis the grid, that sort of thing, but also in terms of looking at the interactions of their impacts. We've talked a great deal, for example, about IP and the migration to IP. One of the differences between the legacy network and the IP network that we'll all eventually be involved with is the IP network is not a self-powered network. So unless more effort is made with regard to the reliability of the network to operate in the event of a power outage, you have a situation in which, at some point in the future, the telecom network could be pulled down by the electric grid, if the grid outage extends for too long a period of time. So there's a need to discuss among the various silos that we touch. I think that's where the states are uniquely equipped to address that. The federal government is still compartmentalized. Each one of them deals with their little fiefdom, well, their big fiefdom, their growing fiefdom as they usurp state authority. But the states have a unique perspective that they can bring to that process. And infect, if you will, our regulated brethren with, in terms of understanding the need to share a vision as well as each having their own.
All right, so we want to make sure that you have a chance to ask some questions, and since you've been patient and stayed, so Michael?
Question for Commissioner Landis. You were talking about the transformation order?
Yes.
Which I'll bet a beer nobody in this room's read half of it, and I can't imagine any of us could ever get through the whole thing, literally. Aside from the straight-up preemption question that you alluded to and the states' rights issues, what are the regulatory policy issues that concern you as a state regulator with respect to that order, if there's a way to explain them?
Let's start with TA 96. TA 96 laid out a very clear vision, and it was basically that we are going to place the bulk of our faith in the marketplace. We're going to encourage competition. We're going to encourage more players into the marketplace. We're going to bring the benefits of competition, pulling down costs and so on, to the benefit of the many. Probably well over 90% of the population has benefited from that. The move to the market has been a success. But Congress also saw a need for, if you will, Indiana and Kentucky are kind of Bible Belt territory. So, if you will, a covenant, and that's what Congress created in return for going to a market-based and market-driven sort of environment. For the vast majority of the population, we will also provide a support mechanism in the form of universal service for the high-cost urban, rural, or the high-cost rural and insular areas of the country, 5 to 10%. That's what universal service was intended to be. Chairman Janikowski transformed that. He said, well, what we need is broadband. So all we need to do is to reallocate these funds to build out a broadband. Well, first of all, they got the price wrong. Those of you who heard the presentation this morning heard that the cost of building out one loop was on the order of $3,400. The FCC is saying $775 should be more than adequate, to pay half the cost of building out broadband. But at the core, they basically changed the rules. And not only that, they've pulled the rug out from under the rural companies that in good faith built out, in many cases, broadband, in a significant number of cases, fiber to the premises. And then they went out and they borrowed the money to make that happen. And the FCC is now saying, if you spent too much money based on their arcane formula, you don't get support anymore. We're going to give you a haircut. There are two companies in Indiana, two small rural companies in Indiana, that got that haircut because they were in the 90th percentile in terms of capital expenditures. The reason why they were in that 90th percentile has nothing to do with their effectiveness in the use of resources and everything to do with with the fact that they were building out fiber to the home. That's exactly what we've been saying for the last decade, and yet the FCC is now penalizing them retroactively for having done that. Then there's the question of how are the companies to look at things on a going forward basis. You know, the high cost reimbursement is based on a retrospective formula. You know, you get reimbursed for what you've already spent 2 years prior. So if you're going to plan your business under the transformation order, you have to know not only what you're going to spend 2 years from now, but you have to know what all other 700 plus companies are likewise doing, so that you are under the cutoff point. It's absurd. Their model is based on calculations that tell us that it costs 47% less to build out telecommunications infrastructure in Alaska than it does in the lower 48. Now you tell me that that even meets the test of common sense. The whole order is rife with flaws. You know, many of them a part of the model, but the whole order is just simply a mess, as indicated by the fact that they've had 6 motions on reconsideration. Now, think of trying to do your job, whatever it may be, if somebody comes in and changes the rules every 3 months for a year and a half, and you get some sort of sense for the level of uncertainty that the FCC has created, you know, for a large segment of the communications community. As you can tell, I don't have any passion whatsoever.
Another question. Don't tell me no, everyone's afraid now to ask a question.
I'll go again. But I'll change topics. After AT&T filed their petition last year, most state commissions did not file comments when the comment cycle opened, but Indiana was among the states that did file comments and specifically mentioned concerns with respect to interconnection. And I just wondered if there's anything, in light of all the discussion today on IP transition, if you'd like to add anything to that.
Let's start with the fact that our keynote speaker, I think, hit it on the head. You know, there are a great deal of benefits, you know, to be derived from the transition to IP. And not only that, I think it is inevitable. Having said that, you know, there are also significant pitfalls. I mean, if you consider, for example, Verizon was mentioned earlier this afternoon, and in the pleadings that were filed with regard to the Verizon filing, well, I can't find it right now, but there were a whole series of filings with regard to concerns specifically with regard to what Verizon was proposing to do in Fire Island and on the Jersey Shore. In terms of equivalent, there are not only faxing, but there are other areas that are not capable of being supported by the specific technology that Verizon was holding up as a substitute for the infrastructure that was blown away, literally. Among them, the ability for a restaurant or a retail establishment to swipe the card, you know, and transmit it. That is not, although ironically, if you think about the little cube arrangement, that sort of charge card arrangement on the cell phone apparently is unaffected. But many of the capabilities, some of which are fairly marginal, others of which are fairly significant, are not currently addressed by the Verizon proposal, which candidly I think was ill-considered and frankly an attempt to kind of push ahead with what their agenda was I should emphasize, significant contrast to the AT&T approach, which I think is a very sensible one. Let's go through the process of identifying what the pitfalls are. Let's do the trials. Let's find out what the problems are and work through them, as opposed to simply charging ahead. But then that kind of says a great deal about the respective philosophies of those two companies.
Other questions? All right, well, I'll give the two of you then one last chance to sort of make a statement and maybe sort of frame it from the standpoint of a takeaway or two. If, as you speak to this group, what are the one or two things in telecommunications that someone should take away, either a concern, something that's positive, whatever you would like, whether it's regulatory, whether it's the changes and directions in technology, doesn't matter, but what sort of jumps out and you say, this is the one or two things to sort of take away. Chairman?
I think one issue that's very important, we ought to keep it on the agenda for some time, and that's the time it takes to reconnect consumers. It's an issue that we've been addressing in NARUC. When I took this job, it was 2008, and my third month on the job, I was going to New York to brief the analysts on some stock issues. And so I finished that meeting, I walk out to a restaurant, and my cell phone is buzzing, and I get this voice that sounded familiar, but I wasn't quite sure who it was. He said, "Can you tell me who the AT&T representative is for Hopkins County, Madisonville?" I said, "Who is this?" He's the governor. Yes, sir. And I mentioned Tony, but we got better information on who really was on the ground at that time. There was towers that froze in the Ike, in the ice storm that we had, and there were big towers that were on the ground. And I never would think that Kentucky would be, within a short period of time, the victim of an ice storm, and on top of that, a hurricane. So we set about doing something to sort of prepare the commission, but also send a message to all the utilities to be prepared along the lines of expecting more horrific storm activity. And so we put a tag on that and called it the Ice and Ike report. And we periodically send through areas like the co-ops and others that we don't often hear much from, just to make sure that they're still prepared to meet the consumer's demands. I think we need to concentrate on the consumer and make sure that they are aware that there are people who care about them at the PSC and all the utilities, and keep focused on how we can reconnect quicker and respond quicker. I know it's asking a lot, but I think the time has come when the consumer is beginning to expect it. And it's happening among all the utilities. So, that's part of being prepared to be up and ready for other activities like work and things like that. So we don't want people missing their job because they don't have any electricity, or all the phone calls that I have responded to. We need to try and set goals to make sure that the reconnection is in a timely fashion.
Commissioner Landis?
Maybe two things. First of all, bring a healthy skepticism to whatever you hear from whoever you hear it, okay? And ask yourself, is there another way to look at this data or at this factoid or at this particular anecdote that maybe gives me a different insight into what I need to know, regardless of what your job is? It's common knowledge, for example, that 30% of the population has cut the cord. And there are those who suggest that in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, it will literally be the case that somebody needs to walk into the last central office that remains standing and shut off the PSTN or whatever then is the network. But if you probe that question a little further, if there are 30% of the population who have cut the cord, we also know that there's about 10% of the population which do not currently have wireless. So what that does mean is that 60% of the population say, I want both of the above. I want both terrestrial service and wireless service. And what I would suggest to you is each of those technologies has a significant and an important place and role in the communications, both currently and going forward. But it's all in how you look at the data, which, by the way, is where I have a lot of my problems with the FCC. They seem to only be determined to look at it one way. The other thing that I would suggest to you is, in terms of focusing the debate, broadband has been at the fore of much of what we've talked about over the course of the last decade. And what we really need to do is to focus the debate in the sense that communications, if you will, broadband, advanced services, really is the network of commerce. And not only that, but the roadway of commerce, in the same way that trails in the 18th century, canals in the early 19th century, railroads and telegraphy in the late 19th century, and highways in the 20th century were at the very heart of the entirety of commerce. And so at a point in time when we're concerned about the economy and there's a great deal of hand-wringing about it, we really need to focus and get the public debate focused on just how essential communications as a whole is to the future of this economy and to the future of this country.
All right. Well, thank both of you very much, and we appreciate your comments and your enthusiasm for the issues. Again, let me just give thanks to all the people I mentioned before. I'd also like to mention John Young, Randall Winchester, and Annie Van Diver and Celeste out there that have helped at the desk and so forth. And we had other students that were parking and doing different things at various times. And so, again, we appreciate you coming, and we appreciate all the speakers to bring this caliber of talent and thought to the university, where our faculty and students can also interact. Hopefully you've been able to network and do some things as well, and we do appreciate that. Michael, do you have any other comments that you'd like to add? Well, again, thank you very much, and until we meet again.
Thanks for
My pleasure.